Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday, June 4th, 2013 Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting. We will begin with a flag salute led by Supervisor Whiteley.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Holman, would you please read the statement of meeting procedures?
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, June 4th, 2013. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there is a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has discretion of limiting total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all pagers and cell phones be either turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you very much. And then now is the time for public comment. Anyone who wants to address the board on any item that's not on the agenda, please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Janine O'Brien. I live in Auburn. I happen to be a representative from my faith organization to a group called the Placer People of Faith Together.
Yeah.
I happen to be on the general board, but I'm representing a committee, a special committee that's been working on this 211 issue for a couple of years, and would like to respectfully request being on the agenda for your next meeting, if possible, because we're writing grant proposals at this time and would find an approval and acceptance by the individuals as supervisors helpful on that board, that grant writing effort. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishes to address the board under public comment? Seeing none, we will move to supervisor committee reports. Do we have any? Supervisor Euler, your light is on.
Not truly a committee report, but more a report on the success of the return of H1 hydroplane racing to Placer County after 46 years. We had Big Wake weekend down at the Granite Bay State Park this weekend, and beyond being extremely exciting and fascinating to learn about the sport of racing and all the strategy that goes into it, it was incredibly well run. The no traffic issues materialized. The folks that came into the park area were, by everything I saw in the 2 days I was there, very well behaved, and I don't think that it really got the kind of publicity in advance. It certainly got plenty of publicity as the boats were running, but the kind of publicity in advance to really help drive the foot traffic that we would like to see in future events. And so I spoke with Dave Snyder on Friday of last week after being out there on Friday morning with some of the media folks to see what we can do next year about us being a little bit more actively engaged in promoting this. These teams travel. It's incredible the amount of equipment and people that each of these H1 teams travel with. And then they have a number of different races going on that are smaller boats, smaller teams, and all the rest beyond just the big boats. And so obviously tremendous opportunity for us as a region to showcase ourselves and generate some good TOT tax dollars and some some sales tax and all that fun stuff. And so I think us participating a little more actively next year in the promotion of this event, should they choose to come back to this venue. And I spoke with a number of drivers and owners who are very, very pleased with the venue. They love our area. A number of them said, I've been on Interstate 80 and driven through here, had no idea this was here, how beautiful this area is, and all the rest. And so anything we can do to really help promote that and profile our area like that, I think we got to take advantage of.
So I trust there was plenty of water.
There was enough water for the race, yes. There was, and interestingly, the low water level in the lake actually provided for more area for staging for the equipment and all the rest down on some of the ramps that otherwise would have been covered by water in a high water year. So, but yeah, they only need a 2-mile course, and they were able to find a nice 2-mile course that worked out very well, provided great spectator viewing, and just a really neat family event.
Good, thank you. Supervisor Montgomery.
2 very quick reports. The first is I attended, as part of my role as APCD chair this year, the Breathe California Clean Air Awards last year, where I was delighted to see the city of Auburn receive an award for the sustainability steps towards cleaner air that they're taking within the city. And that was just really great to be able to go down and see one of our Placer County jurisdictions be represented and recognized for all their work. The other thing was on Sunday, I had the honor of attending the final dedication unveiling ceremony for the 442nd Memorial down in Roseville at the Santucci Justice Center. And for those who haven't been down there recently, there's the big bronze statue, which is now flanked by 2 beautiful, huge granite stones with plaques on them, 2 gorgeous black marble benches. Then, trying to remember what's next, 2 big display stands with engraved bricks, some of which are still for sale if anyone is looking to help defray the cost of that project. And in the center, an enormous granite boulder that kind of recognizes and explains the significance of the larger surrounding monument. It's really breathtaking. It was just phenomenal to be there. The county is currently in negotiations with Ken Tokutomi and the other folks, the Japanese American Citizens League, to take over the responsibility for the maintenance of that area. They've really done the heavy lifting, and now it's really up to us to make sure that that stays just as beautiful and pristine into the future as it is today. So I was absolutely thrilled to be there and be able to represent the county.
Thank you for being there. I was out of the area and couldn't attend, and I regret that. I have a report on May 23rd. I joined our biomass program manager, Brett Story, and our private partner, Greg Stengel, from the CEO of Phoenix Energy in Alexandria, Virginia, for the Department of Energy Bioenergy Technologies Office 2013 Project Peer Review. Since we've gotten about $3 million through grants from the Department of Energy secured by Senator Feinstein's offices, one of the requirements is to go back and explain to the Department of Energy what we've been doing with our program. So we're reviewed by consultants, university professors, business people that are in the industry. Probably over 100 projects that were reviewed during the 4 days that we were there. I wasn't there for the 4 days, but there was a 4-day project peer review. We were in the heat and power session. We were the last session on Thursday afternoon. We were overwhelmingly well received. Brett did a masterful job in presenting where we're at with this project. Actually, the reviewers turned around and gave me a hand. I was just there for, star power. But they were really excited about what we're doing. Elliot Levine, who is the technologies manager for the Department of Energy, actually stated that it was nice to end the 4 days on a high note. And so it was really well received, and we're doing a great job and well received back there. We also met with Congress LaMalfa's office and just talked to him about the program. There's plenty of opportunities in his congressional district for these types of programs, and so he was very interested in that. And then we met, of course, with Senator Feinstein's office and Senator Boxer's office and let them know where we at and why we were back there. Again, well received, so we're really looking forward to completing that project. And that concludes my report. Are there any other reports from supervisors? Alrighty, we will then move to the consent agenda. Any items on the consent agenda that supervisors want pulled? Anybody in the public want to pull any item? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Euler. Duran. Wygant. Montgomery.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes, thank you. See you later.
Spend break.
Thanks for coming.
Enjoy your day.
Is this something we said?
Where's the love?
Yeah, get back to work. We'll now move to department item number 5, the minutes of April 22nd, 2013.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to approve the minutes of April 22nd, 2013. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Did you get that? Okay. We'll move to department item 6, Health and Human Services, Children's System of Care, Contract Whole Person Learning Incorporated. Mr. Connect.
Good morning, Chairman Holmes, members of the board. Richard Connect with the Children's System of Care. In Placer County, foster youth who remain in the system through their 18th birthday are relatively infrequent, as CSOC staff and partners are effective at finding permanent placements through guardianship, adoption, and kinship care for most of the young people we serve. Whole Person Learning, a longtime provider of services to young people, has effectively delivered intensive housing services and other supports for the last 5 years in Placer and has supported a successful transition to adulthood for nearly 190 former foster children since that time, many of whom would otherwise enter early adulthood without family, homes, or other basic resources. Many of these young adults, unfortunately, often find themselves homeless or incarcerated. More than 50% of Placer's young participants are currently enrolled in 4-year academic programs, and a number of them have or are soon to graduate from college. This contract effectively utilizes $594,000 in state money. There is no county general fund required, and I'd urge your recommendation. Be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from board members?
Yeah.
Supervisor Duran.
Quick question. Where is the Whole Person Learning Inc. located?
They're an Auburn-based facility.
Great, thank you.
Anybody in the audience wish to address this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item 6, the Children's System of Care Contract Whole Person Learning Incorporated. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The item is moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now adjourn as the Placer County Board of Supervisors and convene as the Placer County In-Home Supportive Services Public Authority. Adult System of Care Budget, In-Home Supported Services Public Authority Budget for fiscal year 2013-14. Ms. Baumann.
Good morning, Supervisor, members of the board. So we have before you a separate budget for the in-home support services budget that will go with the other budget you're going to consider this morning. This is a standalone budget, and as you know, the in-home support services program was established December 3rd in 2002. Several purposes: one, to provide assistance to in-home support services recipients that needed assistance with finding providers out in the community, also doing investigations of those providers to make sure they were qualified, as well as a referral system so that we could identify appropriate numbers of people to folks looking for providers. In addition, the In-Home Support Services Public Authority, for purposes of labor negotiation, represents the providers regarding wages, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment. So Placer County uses this program to provide services to about 3,000 recipients per year. There are about 300 of those that use the registry, and about 2,000 providers who are assisted with employment, enrollment, orientation, training, support, and counseling services during the 12-13 year. The Public Authority contracts with county services to provide staff and resources in terms of county council, other kinds of services that the authority needs for those purposes. The budget is limited to the responsibilities of the provider registry, background checks, training, and negotiations, and the county's share of IHSS provider wages is identified in the Health and Human Services aid budget. So I'd ask your approval for this budget. It's a non-general fund budget. It's a combination of federal, state, and county funds for a total of $827,641, which includes state and federal revenue of about $146,000, also transfers from the adult system of care, and requires a county general fund match of $1,690. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but recommend approval.
Supervisor Duran.
Sure. Thank you, Maureen, for bringing this forward. Question on the registry, what type of, and I'm going to assume that the registry is for the providers, correct?
Correct.
What type of outreach do we do to get direct people to the registry?
We do recruitments, advertising periodically. Sometimes we close the registry and are not accepting new, depending on the numbers that we have. So when we have a robust number of people, then we don't add people, because we want people to be able to actually get some work if they're interested in doing that. So a general kind of recruitment strategies in terms of the community.
And aside from that, recruiting the actual registrants, the people that use the registrants, how are they directed to the registry?
So because we're assessing the recipients directly and have social workers that are interacting with them, it's really clear to us whether somebody has a family member or a relative
So
or...
you direct them.
Absolutely. So we want to make sure that they have that option.
Great. Thank you so much.
Any other questions from board members? Anyone in the public wish to address this item? Seeing none, bring it back to the board for action.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item 6B as the Placer County Board of Supervisors, as the Placer County In-Home Supportive Services Public Authority. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed or any abstentions? Hearing none, the item is moved. Thank you. We'll now move to our 9:15 timed item. Oh, we're going to reconvene we'll adjourn as the Placer County In-Home Supportive Services Public Authority and reconvene as the Placer County Board of Supervisors. It's nice to see you all again. Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Graham Canals from the County Executive Office, and I have the good fortune this morning of presenting this proposed budget book, actually, and this one also related to special districts, for your consideration this morning. This is a milestone in our budget development process, which actually begins in late August, early September each year, where we begin to capture information about revenues and cost drivers in the upcoming year and work with departments to pull together what is presented to you today. This is intended to reflect your board's vision and policy direction, the leadership of the county executive officer, and that of department heads and the fiscal staff and program staff throughout the county, as well as the county executive office. And it's really a reflection of a collective effort. I just get to be the lucky chap that gets to stand up here and present it to you today. I will say that there are two folks that are most responsible for both starting our budget engines and getting us through the finish line that should be mentioned this morning, and they are Brian Hacker and Denise Medlin, both of whom have done a simply outstanding job over the course of the past couple of years, and particularly for this 13-14 proposed budget, and so wanted to highlight that at the outset of this.
Thank you.
So, why are we here today? For your board's consideration, we have the 2013-14 interim spending plan that includes the proposed county budget as well as the proposed budget for the county service areas, the lighting districts, and the sewer maintenance districts. We're also going to be considering revisions to the budget and financial policy, as well as a GASB 54, which is an accounting rule implication to the way we treat carryover fund balance and how that plays out in the actions before you today. As we transition from the last several years of an economic downturn, the economy is improving. Both property tax and sales tax sales taxes continue to move up. Property tax is beginning to go up, a very positive sign. The median housing prices are 14% higher than they were just a year ago, so a very positive sign. However, we're not all the way there related to the economy. There's certainly a long way to go. What is presented to you today will reflect the gradually improving economy, and you can see the reduction to the unemployment rate year over year as well. However, there is certainly some cost pressures that we continue to face related to the cost of doing business, and some targeted risks related to the state that I wanted to touch on. A couple of weeks ago, you heard from Human Services related to a lot of the good work that they're doing with our top-rated in the state call center, dealing with significant state program expansions relative to low-income and the low-income health. As we sit here today and have this discussion, there are active discussions by the governor and the legislature related to indigent health and the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And what's important for us to think about is that for the 2013-14 year, we have about $1 million risk factor or potential risk to the county related to that discussion. It is being finalized over the course of the next several days, and we will need to revisit that as we get to the final budget, depending upon how those details work out. So I wanted to highlight that relative to a risk from the state. In addition, there's been conversation with your board about state and county programmatic realignment, such as the public safety realignment and the health and human services realignment over the past few years. And there's another round of that is currently being considered that could impact a number of different programs within the county. And so we're keeping an eye on that to make sure that we are minimizing our risks as much as possible and best strategically positioning the county as it relates to those issues. So for the all of what we're talking about today for the proposed budget reflects the board's direction related to the multi-year budget framework that was discussed back in March of this year. That deals with ensuring there are sufficient reserves, having funding dedicated related to infrastructure, reducing the reliance on one-time carryover for an ongoing purpose. It also includes a phased implementation of priority-based budgeting, where we're really focusing on communication, both internally within the county and outwardly related to the public. It includes moving towards a system where we focus on what are the results and what is the public getting for the dollars that are being spent here in the county. It also includes the approach to discretionary revenues in terms of having a proportional distribution between the general fund and the public safety fund. Having an approach related to the cost of doing business and the increases that we would anticipate over the course of the next several years, where there's some balance between the amount that would be covered on the front end versus that amount that would be absorbed by departments, and really trying to get to the most reasonable balance between the priorities that are there and the available resources in terms of translating to services to the public. So the assumptions related to that model that fold into what we have for the 13-14 budget include the gradual economic recovery. On the expenditure side, there are increased contributions to public safety related to that proportional distribution of discretionary revenues, also including your board's direction related to the phased opening of the South Placer Adult Correctional Facility. Generally, as we look ahead to the out years, the assumption is a generally flat contribution to some of the other fund areas. The one exception to that would be to the extent that there are unanticipated carryover revenues that would be available, one-time revenues that would be available, that there could be some targeted resources for some of those one-time costs, such as the infrastructure area. On the cost increases, this assumes about 40% of cost increases being funded out of the gate, and then the remaining 60% would be absorbed for the next few years, followed by a couple of years of 100% of the cost increases being funded for departments. So our budget development related to 13-14, first, it's consistent with our multi-year budget framework, as I just mentioned. It moves us further down the road of sustainability of county operations. For the general fund, for the Public Safety Fund, including the jail. And related to the Library Fund, as you know, there's a strategic plan and a fiscal study that is being completed for the library, and there'll be some options and discussion that will come in the coming weeks to your board related to that item. This also has the priority-based budgeting, as I mentioned, in terms of focusing on those priorities and the communication. So for just a moment, as we consider the budget, wanted to flash back on the accomplishments that have occurred over the course of the last year. First, focusing on priorities and particularly related to communication, having a more open dialogue in our budget development process, and the February 26th Priorities and Challenges Workshop before your board to have a more direct conversation between departments and your board, open to the public to engage in a really open process. Also, the phased opening, the plan related to the South Placer Adult Correctional Facility that was approved by your board May 7th, that being folded into the budget following the completion of the capital project for that South Placer facility. So that has that 2014 opening. The multi-year budget framework, as I mentioned, to ensure that we're on a path towards long-term sustainability, and comprehensive infrastructure planning, really taking all the infrastructure planning efforts that we have underway, all the currently identified projects, and prioritizing those across all functional areas, and taking in your board's direction from that discussion in April related to the economic development and other components that should be folded into that. That element would be folded into the development of a funding framework that would come back to your board. So what's new with the budget? There are a number of changes that have been made to the budget book this year that deal with focusing on communication, also including a spotlight on critical issues, which I'll touch on in a moment, including a county profile to have some broader context about who we are as a county and some of the housing, history, population data, and economics that play into the county. Changing the approach for the department narratives to have a more direct conversation to our residents about what we do and why it's a good use of public resources, and focusing on the usability of the document both internally for those folks that use the budget and also for our residents so that it's easier for them to find the information that they're looking for as they're combing through the budget book. So one of the things that we've added is just a few pages to highlight critical policy issues that are facing the county, sustainability of operations that has been discussed, certainly the approach for priority-based budgeting, infrastructure and working through that planning process, focusing on economic development and really trying to spur the gradual improving economy to spur that growth and to better meet community needs, the phased opening for the South Placer Adult Correctional Facility, and finally, employee engagement, having a motivated workforce that is focusing on innovative service delivery that is unparalleled in the state, making Placer County the shining star in terms of the way to deliver services in the most cost-effective and innovative, innovative way possible. There we go. So the 2013 proposed budget, it's $690 million. That's a reduction year over year of nearly $40 million. What I would say is that reduction primarily is a function of a change in the way that we are budgeting multi-year infrastructure projects. So whereas in the past we would budget the full project in a given year, we are now only budgeting that amount that is anticipated to be needed for the upcoming year. And so there's a reduction associated with that. It does not have any negative impact on the delivery of projects or services in the county. This budget meets certainly our core service priorities consistent with that multi-year budget framework. And then shifting over to the special district side of the house, there's $33.2 million. That covers 192 special districts. That's a significant decrease year over year of about $16 million, which is not substantive on the services side, but rather reflective of some of the individual changes that are occurring where there are one-time costs in the current year that drop off when we get to 13-14. Comparing the budgets in the county operating side, the general fund increase is about $8 million year over year, and I'll touch on some of the changes related to that, partially about increases in our discretionary revenue, partially about increased state-funded responsibilities. Increases in a couple of other areas as well. Public safety, largely linked to the phased opening of the South Placer facility. So that is on here, and you'll see the significant decrease of about $40 million in the road fund related to that change in budgeting those infrastructure projects. So the breakdown of our expenditures by function are displayed here. Largely what you see is about a third of what we do is in the public protection area, about a quarter is related to health and human services, and you can see the other pieces of the pie. This is moving on its own. You can see the other elements. These generally have the same level of distribution as has been the case for the past few years here in Placer County. When we look at the individual category costs of our budget, you'll see that as a direct service organization, most of what we do is related to people. Therefore, the salaries and benefits side is the largest component at 43%. That's a bit higher than it's been for the past couple of years, reflecting both some of the increased cost of doing business, dealing with some of the health insurance costs.
Go back to that slide, Graham. It's jumping around.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the increased cost of doing business related to salaries and benefits, just a function of changes on the health side, but also related to the PERS retirement contribution rates, which are beginning to go up. This is the first year with a significant change based upon actions from CalPERS that impacts the cost for that on the county side. You can also see the infrastructure, capital construction, and debt service component at 20%. In terms of the revenues and sources of funds, this is a bit more detailed than we've displayed in the past. Bottom line related to this is about 40% of our revenues are related to intergovernmental funds, primarily federal and state dollars, and in the neighborhood of 30%.
What's going on here?
Not sure there's, okay. In the neighborhood of 30% are our local discretionary revenues and our fund balance carryover each year. Significant changes year over year include, one, the approach to multi-year infrastructure projects. There's some very good news to highlight here for a moment related to OPEB. We have a draft actuarial. It'll be completed once we get to the June 30th date. That reflects a far lower unfunded liability than we have had for the past few years. And as a result, there are savings reflected in all budgets throughout the county. It's in the neighborhood of $4 million of savings due to savings to our minimum ARC payment, which is the annual required contribution to fund that obligation. So that is folded into our multi-year budget framework and provides a significant benefit on the savings side for all funds within the county. And it's still jumping around.
Graham?
Yes, sir.
Just for those that may be watching at home that aren't familiar with OPEB, can you tell us what OPEB stands for?
Yes, sir. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, primarily related to health benefits for retirees.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So PERS contribution rates and health insurance, I mentioned, both of those are going up by about 11% year over year as a reflection of the cost for health care and the CalPERS related changes. We have increases in the funded positions that deal with primarily the staffing of the South Placer Adult Correctional Facility. There are also increases in the general fund side that deal with the human services programmatic expansions that I referenced earlier that are state and federally funded. We also have within our budget this year, the supplemental requests that we received were prioritized based upon maintaining existing service levels, whether it was a one-time or ongoing cost, if it met an identified board priority, and the fit with our long-term sustainability. And so those prioritized supplemental requests are included. The remainder of the supplemental requests are held for further consideration at the final budget, and we will continue to engage with departments and look at our revenue picture to present recommendations for your board as we move towards the August workshop.
Chairman Holmes?
Oh, yes.
Graham, on the OPEB good news, when you say it's a far lower unfunded liability, what does that really mean?
So the draft actuarial had a liability that was in the $135 million range compared to what was in place 2 years ago at $196. So it's been decreased in the neighborhood of $60 million based upon the county's existing policy approach related to OPEB.
Okay, and historically, we've exceeded the minimum ARC payment historically, and we've used general fund dollars to help pay that down. Is that model still being proposed for this year's budget and moving forward, or are we looking at going back to really the minimum ARC payment with maybe a smaller additional contribution to that?
This budget reflects maintaining the existing county financial policies, which include the continuing the approach related to OPEB. That also includes the board's upfront OPEB policy, and that very question was discussed in the County Finance Committee as we were going over the draft actuarial in terms of alternative ways to look at it, and the outcome of that was to keep it in place pending any further direction from the board.
Okay, thank you.
And Graham,
Yes, sir.
for the public mostly, the unfunded liability started out about 5 years ago, about $350 million, is that correct?
That's correct.
But that was the
320.
combination of the OPEB plus the pension, though, is it not? Or is that just, that was not just,
I believe that was just OPEB.
Just OPEB, right.
was it really?
Yes.
Wow.
It was actually 328 million.
Sounds right.
And who's
Graham.
counting?
Graham, I'd like to follow up at some point in time in the future to discuss what infrastructure could be funded if we did reduce that percentage that goes to OPEB, just to see where we are, because that's a considerable amount of money that we ship away. Not that there isn't going to be a policy change, but I think it's, in all fairness, we all need to know what the ramifications of that continued policy is. Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you, and if there's no Brown Act violation, I'd like to join that discussion.
Okay.
Bring that to the board.
On the special district side, I mentioned this $33.2 million that's included in there, and that the change year over year is a function of the timing of some of the one-time costs. The biggest one is actually related to SMD1 in a $6.4 million one-time cost. That was funding of the DERA, the Design and Environmental Review Agreement related to the regional sewer project. So that was budgeted in 12-13, and so falls off in the 13-14 year. There are other one-time related changes there. The Dry Creek Park actually is an increase year over year. That's a park that just got completed. There'll be a grand opening in the next couple of weeks for that. This is about delayed, the normal delays of finishing a project towards the end of the year, and then when the costs are actually funded out of that budget. There's also a revised payment approach related to facility costs for the South Placer Wastewater Authority, and so that's included in here related to the facilities costs. And these are budgets that typically have adjustments in the final once the current year has been completed. So looking at our budget and financial policy, it is the board's adopted policy, initially going all the way back to 2003, to guide the way that we frame the budget and address revenues and the costs that are included in there. We use a generally conservative approach to revenues and expenditures to ensure that we remain balanced and on a path towards sustainability, position us for future economic changes. What's before you today are some revisions to that budget and financial policy that do a few different things. First, they align to the County Budget Act to ensure, which has changed over the last few years, to ensure that our budget and financial policy is as up-to-date as possible. Second, there have been discussions over the course of the last few months from your board related to capital projects, and as we move forward on capital projects, ensuring that we are mindful of any impacts to the service costs or service savings that may occur as a result of a new facility. So the budget and financial policy has been revised to address that very issue as we're planning and estimating the cost to do projects on the front end. Also, there was discussion at the February 26th priorities workshop about the fund balance for future occurrences, that reserve, which is used for unfunded client aid costs, and having an identified methodology by which the targeted amount would be referenced. So what's included before you today includes a recommended methodology to get there. All of these changes have been vetted by the Finance Committee per our normal course for budget and financial policy changes. And relative to the future occurrences, there is first a recommendation to change the name to the fund balance for mandated costs, because that's really what it's related to, and then to make sure that it is consistent with what the rules are of GASB 54, and that's the Government Accounting Standards Board statement number 54 that deals with how we classify fund balance. So the changes ensure that if your board were to take an action at the proposed budget to set funds aside in that reserve, that they are then reported that way on the annual financial report. So there are new rules, and this adapts to that, while it also provides, from a policy perspective, a targeted amount related to that reserve that is consistent with the targets that are used for the other reserve areas of the budget. So those are before you today. Also along the lines of the GASB 54 is the approach to carryover fund balance. And this is a new area for us, and we're working this through in a close connection with the Auditor Controller's Office to be sure that we have a agreed to local approach that meets the intent of the board in terms of actions, but also fits within the new structure of the accounting rules. So in aligning to the budget and financial policy, which articulates how a carryover would be used, what's before you today, one of the actions before you today would designate unanticipated carryover fund balance to reserves, infrastructure, there we go, and other one-time board priorities. What's important to note is that this does not preclude the board from redirecting these revenues in any other way, from moving these revenues in any other way, but rather it ensures that when the annual financial report is submitted, it reflects your board's intent related to carryover fund balance. So when we exit today and complete this discussion, we'll continue our ongoing efforts related to infrastructure planning, move forward on 2012-13 year end and closing that process out, where we'll have identified what the final carryover fund balance may be, prepare for the August budget workshops, and then ultimately package together that final budget for your board's consideration. And so with all of that, what I am requesting from you today is adoption of the 2013 proposed county budget, and the same for the lighting districts, the county service areas, and the sewer maintenance districts. Also, early purchase of equipment on the master fixed asset list as part of our normal course. Requesting adoption of the resolution that has the revisions to the budget and financial policy. And then finally, the designation of unanticipated carryover fund balance to reserves, infrastructure, and other one-time board priorities. And with that, I would hand it back to the board.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Montgomery?
Graham, I'd like to, at this point, maybe go through some of these revisions and changes to the budget and financial policy. Just get a little bit of clarification on why some of these changes have come forward. Many of them are just very straightforward and no question at all. But starting on page 16 of our board packet, this is attachment 2, budget and financial policy. I'm wondering what the change of dates from September 30th to October 2nd, what spurred that? Is there a particular meaning for the date of October 2nd?
There is now, yes. In the past, the County Budget Act had a September 30th date in it that where we were required to adopt the final budget. That date was changed in the County Budget Act, which is in state statute, to October 2nd, and so we're just catching up to that.
Okay. Moving then to page 18 of the report, the A87 costs. Are there any changes in these, either the strikeout or the new language, that prohibits the county from continuing sort of our supplemental A87 payments for departments that can't meet those?
No. This is more about, it actually is it's a slight rewording of what was in place before to ensure that there is appropriate flexibility for departments that are unable to meet the 87 costs, but also that we're leveraging dollars to the extent that we can claim for those A87 costs.
Okay, and is there going to be some sort of document for the departments that really clarifies the A87 costs for individual departments, how they're calculated, in a process? I know some departments are uncomfortable with their A87 costs, a process to sort of not negotiate, but at least get a better understanding of how they're determined, and if there's any opportunity for reductions.
So absolutely, yes. In fact, we had a number of discussions with departments earlier this spring about A87, trying to better understand what does that mean, and this is about indirect costs that are charged internally within the county and what how those are distributed out, making sure that there's clarity about how we do it, and also to work through a comprehensive review process, which is currently underway within our office and with departments and with the auditor controller, to ensure that we have absolute crystal clear clarity that anything that cannot be funded is identified and covered, and anything that can be leveraged with federal and state resources, grant resources, whatever it might be, is structured in that way, and that we remove some of the mystery related to it. It is complex, it's not easy to follow, and few, whether it's here or any other county or in the state, few understand exactly how it's structured because of the level of complexity, and we want to remove the mystery as much as possible, and we would fold that into discussions with departments over the course of the fall.
Okay. Speaking of mystery, again, on page 18, 2.2.5, there's some change in the language. The county executive office shall solicit input for, which replaced and consider, revenue estimates from audited controller and other county departments. What was the purpose behind that change, and are there any real implications in terms of the input from departments and other electeds into the county budget process?
I don't believe there's any change, there's any implication or change to what our normal practice would be. This actually lines up with the way that we have typically operated over the course of the last number of years. We actually encourage any information that we can get from others and perspective about the way we calculate revenue estimates, also the way we look at some of the cost estimates, and that's been helpful particularly in utilizing the County Finance Committee in a collaborative manner where we're able to work through differences of perspective so that we can emerge with the right balanced approach to revenues and costs in the county.
Okay. On page 20 and 21, I'm just really pleased to see under the capital budgets 2.4 the changes that really just make it more clear what we've spent, what we think we're going to spend, and in the future how we, again, provide the supporting documents for the ongoing savings. I think that's going to be a huge part of the discussion on the animal shelter and some of our other larger infrastructure projects. On page 22, on these mandated costs, on this mandated costs piece, it says a balance should be accumulated over time until 5% of mandated costs are achieved. Mandated costs are defined as medically indigent, public assistance, and other non-discretionary costs. Where are we in relation to that 5% piece right now?
We're probably about halfway, a little over halfway there.
Okay, and what's our expectation as to how long it will take us to get there generally? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
A few years, probably. Yeah, so I would say it's certainly possible over the course of the next 3 years or so to hit that target number. The one risk factor that I mentioned on the front end that deals with indigent health, potential $1 million in 13-14, that could negatively impact the ability to do that to the extent that there is a real reduction in the services for what is a mandated cost. And so we're working through that piece of it to try to ensure that that number is as low as possible. I'd like it to be zero. I don't think that will happen, but to make it as low as possible for us. This is certainly one of the critical safety valves related to that kind of impact that could come from the state, and there could be others as well. But absent that, probably in a 3-year time frame.
Okay, that's great. And I have to say that, generally I'm really quite pleased with what I see here in terms of the changes to budget and financial policy. I would request that in the future, these be brought to the supervisors ahead of time before it's actually on the agenda, so that we're able to review them and go over and maybe not have to ask these questions in public. But even though the Finance Committee said, yeah, this is all great and blessed it, it's always good, I think, for us to have the conversations ahead of time rather than sitting up in the dais. So, thank you.
I agree, certainly.
Any other questions from board members? Seeing none, anyone in the public wish to address the board on the proposed budget? Oh, Supervisor, sorry.
Thank you.
Late light.
Graham, we year after year over the past 5 years, we've been able to come together here as a board, and through discussion, negotiation, some arm twisting with our departments, we've been able to present to our taxpayers a balanced budget. And whereas that in and of itself is a fairly significant feat, given what has happened to our revenue streams in the last 5 years, I don't think it adequately tells the picture of the overall fiscal health of the county. And Robert alluded to this earlier when he was talking about where we sat in 2007, 2008, when we were having conversations. I remember our meeting down at the Zinfandel Grill in Rockland as we were first setting about what some of our long-term policies were going to be in terms of reining in our unfunded liabilities. And I think when you look at where Placer County sits from an overall fiscal health standpoint, you look at the balance sheet, our net worth, if you will. I think what you would see is that where many counties continue to struggle to this day to figure out how to just be able to report out to the state that their budget is in balance, we have not only consistently done that, but we have driven down our long-term obligations. As we are beginning to see with our ARC payments, those decisions in driving down our long-term obligations are resulting in short-term reductions on our demand and our cash flows through a reduction in our ARC payments. And really, overall, as a county, we have come out of this recession in an overall stronger fiscal position than we went into it. We made some tough decisions that required us to look folks in the eye and say, I'm sorry, but we've got to do this, whether it was our bargaining units, our managers, whomever, and this board made those tough decisions. And overall, as a county, we're in a stronger, better place for it, and I think very well positioned as things begin to improve, very well positioned to capitalize on that strength from a service delivery standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, and then be able to do, as we've discussed several times at this board, be able to do those kinds of things that help us then grow the pie, that economic pie here in Placer County, that drive those general fund revenues that will make us even more strong as we move into the future. And so while it's nice to sit here and say we've got a balanced budget again, it's a whole lot nicer to be able to work with a group of professionals, both on this board, our department heads, and all the staff that help us to get where we've gotten over these last 5 years. it's very nice to have been able to work with folks, not always agreeing in how to get to that end goal, but ultimately coming together and providing the taxpayers of Placer County with a tremendous return on their investment so far, and really position us for good things in the future. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone from the CEO's office through all the different department heads and the folks working within the departments as we've made these adjustments in delivering our services. But they've always kept their eye on the ball in terms of to whom we report, and they worked right along with us to make those changes happen and put us in this great position. So just wanted to express my thanks and appreciation to everybody for that.
Well said, Supervisor Euler, but just for the record, I want everyone to understand that we were at a budget workshop in a conference room at the Zinda Building.
You're right, and it is still viewable in the county archives on video if anybody wants to go back and dedicate the 4 hours to watching it.
Right, okay. Thank you. Any other board comments? Supervisor Montgomery.
I would just like to echo Supervisor Euler's words and thank really everyone who's been involved in this effort, and it really has been a county-wide and community-wide effort. I know that I have personally had many members of the public weigh in on what they think our priorities should be, and that's always certainly a factor in my mind when having discussions with staff about how we spend our county dollars. And I think it's important for us to really recognize that we are all also taxpayers and users of these services. So it really does matter to us on a very visceral level as well that we do the right thing with these dollars that we're tasked with managing appropriately. So my sincere thanks to you and to everyone who's been involved in this process. I think this year's process has been much clearer, much cleaner, much more understandable, hopefully the economy will continue to improve, and years into the future we'll be able to build back some of our services and build back some of our staffing to really provide that top-notch level of service that we provide now, but we could provide better with more dollars and more staff. Thank you.
Supervisor Weigand.
Yeah, just echo all of that and emphasize thanks to staff over a lot of years for, I think, some extraordinary budgeting work, but particularly highlight that personally I'm really excited about the changes that will be made in our budgeting process that allows for better communication to the public. In my opinion, government budgets are not conducive to conveying how well we implement the expenditure of public funds for the missions that we're trying to accomplish. And I think we're going to have much better accuracy with our budgets and our actual performance, which would be helpful. But the way we're slicing up the different categories clearly encouraged me a lot, as it'll be easier for me to, when I get out and about and do State of the County talks, to relate that information. So some huge improvements and innovative ideas that I see going forward. So thanks, Graham, and to all the staff that helped with that.
Supervisor Duran.
Thank you. Not one to break up a kumbaya moment. But I do think that it's important that any of the budget adjustments that we do make throughout the course of the year be reflected somewhere. I know it can be difficult to track, so maybe a quarterly sheet that kind of shows what changes that were made so the public can follow it. It's very difficult, even for me and my staff, to kind of follow what changes are being made throughout the course of the year to what budget. So following along with what Robert's saying about the outreach and communication, I think that would be nice to have.
And I would like to thank you for a comprehensive, easy-to-understand report. I want to thank you for meeting with me ahead of time and going over everything. And I want to thank you for recognizing Mr. Hacker and Ms. Medlin in the back. I know they're working all the time tirelessly. You get the star power to come forward and bring it forward, but I know they do a great job for us, so thank you. And with that, Supervisor Euler.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to move approval of the 5 requested items associated with the 13-14 proposed budget.
I'll second that, but I'm not sure. Was there any public comment on this?
I did call for it, but I didn't see anybody come forward. I'll call again. Does anyone wish to speak to us?
Happy to second Supervisor Euler's motion then.
Okay, this is All those in favor of approving the proposed budget? All those in favor?
We need a roll call.
Oh, yes, a roll call.
Euler, Duran, Wygant, Montgomery,
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now we'll move to the 10 o'clock timed item, since we're here. Amendment to agreement and adoption of updated fees, Placer County, City of Roseville Joint Traffic Fee Program, presented by Mr. Grimm. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, board members. My name is Ken Grimm with the Department of Public Works. Today, we're asking you to conduct a public hearing on revising a capital improvement program and fee schedule for the Placer County, City of Roseville Joint Fee Program. In addition to that, we're asking you to authorize the county executive to sign the agreement with the City of Roseville that enacts that fee and outlines the methodology, as well as approving the capital improvement program and the fee associated with the county. For a little bit of background, in 2004, the city and county established the joint fee program primarily to make improvements to Baseline Road in West Placer, as well as some improvements along Fittement Road and Willerga Road, particularly the bridge on Willerga Road over Dry Creek. Since that time, there have been new specific plans that have been approved. Within the city, we have the Placer Vineyard specific plan. We also have Regional University that have been approved. And in the city, we have the Sierra Vista specific plan that was approved and Creekview specific plan. So the impact of those changes are located in Exhibit A, I believe page 27 of your book. In the Dry Creek area, where most of the money is being raised for this free fee program, the fee is going to be reduced by approximately 15%, going down to $727. In addition to that, in some of the other outlying fee areas, Granite Bay, Penryn, Newcastle, we've actually determined that with all the new development that's occurring, that they have completed their fair share contribution for those improvements, and so their fee will go down to zero. In Placer West, the area kind of west of Lincoln, north of Baseline Road, we are going to see an increase of approximately $68 per unit, so a modest increase. And in the Sunset Industrial area, an increase of $4 per unit. Again, a very minor increase. We have been working with Roseville to reach out to the development community. For us, that's particularly Placer Vineyards. We've worked with them, and they are approve of the proposal that's before you today. We've also met with the City of Roseville, the Building Industry Association, the BIA, and they also have no concerns with what's being approved. The program will raise $56 million to improve Baseline Road and Willerga Road Bridge, and fairly distribute those costs between all those developments that are going to benefit from those improvements. And so with that, we're asking you to, again, approve the joint fee program, the agreement with the City of Roseville, and the associated capital improvement program, as well as the fee schedule. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. And any comments from board members? Anyone in the public wish to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back for action. It's been moved and second to approve item 2, the Public Works Amendment to Agreement and Adoption of Updated Fees, Placer County, City of Roseville Joint Traffic Fee Program. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, the item is moved. Thank you. And let's bring in Mr. Tabor so he can go back to work. This is item 7, Public Works Award Contract number 1113, roadway surface treatment for the summer of 2013. Mr. Tabor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Kevin Tabor, Public Works Road Maintenance Engineering Manager. Thanks for sneaking me in. With this next item, we're asking you to approve 3 separate actions. One is to adopt the resolution awarding this construction contract number 1133 to VSS International of West Sacramento in the amount of $1,739,554.12. Also authorize the Director of Public Works to execute change orders up to a 15% threshold, and then also finally adopt a budget revision appropriating $250,000 that we got from a Cal Recycle grant. Your board, Your board approved the project for advertisement in April. We opened bids in early May, and we received 5 bids. All bids were significantly lower than my engineer's estimate, which was good news. And the low bidder, VSS International, came in at approximately 35% under my engineer's estimate at the $1,739,554 low bid. Excuse me. We are going to resurface approximately 51 miles of county roadways with this project. Approximately 28.5 miles of microsurfacing, which is a kind of a type of slurry seal. We're going to rubberized chip approximately 14 miles, and then Cape seal, which is a combination of those 2 other seals, approximately 7.5 miles. Excuse me. And I would like to mention, with the budget revision for that Cal Grant recycle, it is in the amount of $250,000. Corrine Allen in our office applied for that and did a good job negotiating with them, and we were successful. That's the maximum grant, and that grant requires that we use 100% California recycled tires in the oil, the chip seal binder. So I don't remember the exact number of tires that it will prevent from going in landfills, because it will depend on exactly how many, what percentage of tire rubber the contractor actually uses, but it'll be a minimum of 15% of the oil will be comprised of California recycled tires. So that's a win-win for everybody, and we really didn't see an increase in unit cost based over last year. As a matter of fact, we saw unit prices go down, obviously, significantly. So let's see. Let me make sure I cover all the bases. I think I have. So with that, I'll just move, I'll move approval. I'll second.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'll put it out there. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
No, I'm glad to see that rubber's actually hitting the road.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry. Supervisor McCown.
And I apologize, I may have missed this because I was out of the room. Can you just explain briefly how we determine what roadways receive surface treatment and how we prioritize those?
Sure. We well, a couple different items. A portion of the funds for this project are CSA funds, County Service Area funds. So as approximately half of the project is CSA funded. So those roads are on a regular 7-year cycle. So those roads, I guess you could say, automatically get prioritized. With the remaining funds, we try and spread those around the county as best as possible, while also looking at what the pavement condition indexes or indices are for those various roads. Some of the roads in this contract that we're proposing to do haven't been surfaced in 10 or 15 years. So this is a little bit of a catch-up mode. In the early and mid-2000s, we really brought that pavement condition index up a little bit. We've been declining a little bit. Last year, we did surface about another 50 miles of roadway. That was kind of to keep us on track. With this surface treatment, we hope it'll actually start that curve to head up. And that's, of course, hoping in the future we receive additional funding such as this. So it's a combination of trying to look at roads that haven't been treated in a while, looking at pavement condition index of all our roads, and then also trying to make it geographically make sense. That was some of the feedback we heard from the contractors, is that the way we grouped these roads really helped us out with the bid prices. Instead of, shotgun approach, we had a pretty tight grouping of roadways.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And while I have you, Swetzer Road has been pretty well torn up in my district because of the water project. Can you just explain that will be taken care of by the project?
Yeah, that's a South Placer mud project.
Right.
That was, I think, started or ended, however you want to look at it, in the town of Loomis and moved north into the county. And basically tore up Swetzer Road. I know that the CEDRA folks, the engineers and the inspection group are working with SP Mud to finalize that surface treatment. I think they're talking a minimum of at least the entire lane that they worked in. will be reconstructed and repaved. And that's the negotiating part about how wide they're going to make it. But, yeah, I know that's a priority for them. Yeah, the utility projects are always, especially in that area with a lot of rock and groundwater to deal with.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Is there anyone from the audience that wishes to address the board on this item? Seeing none, what is the wish of the board?
Move approval?
It's been moved and seconded to approve item number 7, Public Works Award Contract number 1133, roadway surface treatment for the summer of 2013. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Montgomery?
Yes.
Duran? Wygant? Euler? Holmes?
Yes. Thank you. The item is moved. Thank you
very much.
Tabor. Now we will move to our 10:05 timed item, the Community Development Resource Agency Placer County Conservation Plan. Mr. Lauren Clark.
Morning, Chairman Holmes, members of the board. Pleased to be here this morning to give you an update on the status of the Placer County Conservation Plan, and we do have one relatively minor item, an item related to the eastern boundaries of the permit area, which is something that has moved around in the past and may continue to move around again in the future. But for purposes of today's presentation, the material that we have in the PowerPoint, for the most part, is really focusing on issues related to cost. There is a lot more information contained in your staff report. We will assume that that largely is serving as background, and we won't get into the details of that today. So for the most part, our focus will be on issues related to cost. But I do want to walk you through a background to get you sort of grounded in where we're going at this point, sort of the status of the work program, but also to remind ourselves what is so important about this work program. As we have moved forward over the years, it has always been the objective of the county to retain as much local control of our land use decision-making in the direction that we want to take the county as possible. So regulatory certainty is not only important to the private sector, but it's also important to the folks here in Placer County. We've also, even with the first time we looked at habitat conservation planning back in the 1990s, we wanted to enhance our ability to sort of drive our economic development activities through the decisions that you, the board members, make. So we looked at a habitat conservation plan in the Sunset Industrial area. It has grown, obviously, into the conservation plan that we see today. Also, we'd like to see a lot of governmental efficiency. That certainly is a theme that is very relevant in these lean times in Placer County and has always been relevant here. To avoid redundancy, we have policies related to wetlands. The state has policies at multiple levels, as does the federal government. We're trying to bring those efficiencies and removing some of that redundancy here. Also, for the public who is regulated, to have a place to go where they can get all of their answers. In many cases today, you have to go to 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 agencies to carry forward a project that might be related to infrastructure or land development. Also, it's very important to have one agreed-upon plan. We go through a lot of expense, and we spend a lot of time to develop our community plans and the Placer County General Plan and all of the other planning work that we do. But then there are other agencies' plans who don't necessarily match our plans. And through the PCCP, we have one agreed-upon plan for a 50-year time frame, assuming everything comes together. As it was important to Placer Legacy, it is important to this work program that it's also willing seller, willing buyer. We only will work with those who want to bring forward their properties into conservation. In terms of the coverage area, the PCCP right now continues to be the unincorporated area of western Placer County, primarily west of Highway 49, and the city limits of Lincoln, as well as their sphere of influence area that grows into their new general plan. It does not include the city limits of Auburn, Town of Loomis, City of Rockland, City of Roseville. We've had recent correspondence with the City of Roseville about opportunities to participate in the decision of the city in a formal sense has been to continue to participate at an informal level. Their staff is very present in our meetings, but at this point in time they are not a full participant. In terms of the scope of the regulatory coverage, we are looking at incidental take authorization for the State and Federal Endangered Species Act. So these are listed species at the state and federal level. Also working with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service on some sort of stream bed alteration agreement where they have jurisdiction over stream bed and bank. Working with the state of California on their responsibilities under the Federal Clean Water Act. So they carry out duties on behalf of the Federal Clean Water Act through water quality certifications. And then lastly, some sort of programmatic authorization to work through the Clean Water Act issues related to the discharge of fill into wetlands, Section 404. In terms of the participating agencies, it continues to be obviously the County of Placer. We continue to be the lead on this project. It's not only for county facilities and county infrastructure that we bring forward, but also the decisions that you make, your commission makes, the zoning administrator makes on land development activities. City of Lincoln, exact same reasons. Smaller focus in terms of the geography, but the exact same reasons. Placer County Water Agency is interested in their water infrastructure, both their linear infrastructure, but as well as their facilities, but also to deal with the indirect and cumulative effects, often related to growth, that is associated with their projects. The direct impacts of growth based upon the decisions that you make are largely the indirect effects of their project. We put the two together and we can solve a lot of problems. And then lastly is the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority for Placer Parkway and the Highway 65 bypass interchange expansion with Interstate 80. In terms of the scope of regulatory coverage, there's 6 general themes that are coming forward. One is urban development, and urban development essentially displaces the resources that are there. We're moving away from sort of the old way of doing business where you avoid and minimize impacts on site, you even mitigate on site. We're largely focusing on urbanization, displacement of the resources, and then mitigation for that in a large reserve area. Rural residential is a little bit different. It's more fragmentation. There might be some residual habitat value that remains behind. There might be opportunities for avoidance. So there's a different conservation strategy. In-stream projects get a lot of attention because there's a lot of very sensitive environmental issues within the streams. Capital projects, by and large, is our very large infrastructure, mostly carried out by the county and by the city. And then the conservation strategy itself. We will cause effects as we implement the plan, typically temporary, overall to the benefit of the environment, but also even the Placer Legacy Program. And a good example of that would be the Fish Passage project that we did with Lincoln last year. So the next 2 slides are a bit of an oversimplification, but it is intended to show you what is status quo today in terms of the regulatory environment and what status quo could look like today. So if you take wetlands as one heavily regulated resource, County of Placer inside of its general plan has policies related to no net loss and a whole host of other policies related to wetlands. We also deal with it under the California Environmental Quality Act, as would the City of Lincoln. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has direct jurisdiction over waters of the United States, also referred to as wetlands. Both the State Water Resources Control Board as well as the Regional Water Quality Control Board. One has jurisdiction today, one is gaining jurisdiction through a new permitting program on wetlands at the state level. And then lastly is Cal Fish and Wildlife. Endangered species, same story, multiple agencies plus local government policy. Oak woodlands, which is also a large part of this plan, is largely our issue. It's a CEQA issue based upon changes that occurred with a Senate bill about 5, 6, 7 years ago. When you roll the clock forward, local government essentially is doing the work on behalf of those agencies. That's the consolidation. We might issue the permits, or we might do the work on behalf of those agencies, but just like we do with our general plan and our community plans, we use the PCCP as the guidance document. We have an agreement with the agencies, much like a development agreement, and from that point forward, we simply implement the plan. 31 covered species really hasn't changed a whole lot. There is some talk of dropping at least one plant species, which may not be in Placer County. There was some talk of dropping an invertebrate species, but for right now, it's fairly static. The reserve map, which you are familiar with, that contains both the reserve area, the likely or potential future growth area, existing conservation areas, and the non-participating cities. What's important about this map is that it has been relatively static. That has allowed us to do the conservation planning, and it allowed us today to bring forward to you these preliminary cost estimates. In terms of the conservation strategy itself, we're really organizing the data for today's presentation and a lot of the material that will come forward in the next couple of months, split between the valley and the foothills. The valley urbanizes, the foothill fragments. There's a little bit of urbanization in the foothills, North Auburn, some parts of Granite Bay, a little bit of Penryn, but for the most part, the foothills is a rural residential place. By far, in terms of the landscape, and the valley floor will either be ag, open space, or some sort of reserve land, or urban. In terms of the strategy itself, and this is really one of the first cost factors. So as a map came out of the ad hoc committee, was seen by this Board of Supervisors, was essentially blessed, allowing staff to move forward with a conservation plan. We started to work with that map, and we started to develop a strategy, and essentially in these bullet points is what you start to see. For Oak Woodlands, the primary focus in the foothills is to preserve. So there is not a compensatory replacement standard like we might have with other resources. The dollars will go towards the conservation of the landscape and the management of that landscape. Fuel load management in the foothills is a very big deal in Placer County, and something that there's not enough of it occurring today. There is a small footprint of restoration, but it is not driven by compensatory replacement. So we're largely buying a large reserve area, restoring a portion of it, and managing it. Valley Oak Woodland on the valley floor, different story. Lots of opportunity for Valley Oak Woodland restoration. There could be more Valley Oaks when the permit is done than there is today in western Placer. Vernal pools, heavily regulated resource, multiple species at multiple levels, living both within the grasslands as well as the pools themselves. It's preservation, restoration, compensatory replacement. It's a fully loaded strategy. Riparian is very similar to Valley Oak. We don't have much impact. We have a lot of opportunity. We will replace it, and we will actually be able to go beyond that mitigation standard into a conservation standard. Streams, for the most part, are avoided. So the emphasis on streams is really water quality. There are some fish passage projects we would like to continue to do, and we will seek out outside funding for that. As I mentioned, vernal pools is the #1 priority, has been throughout this initiative. Primarily through the work of the ad hoc committee. We think we have a solution that works for both the county and the city of Lincoln. It does entail the conservation of some 17,000 acres on the valley floor and a restoration of a good portion of that. But we do believe we have reached a solution that should work for the plan. Now the first of the cost slides. This is table 3 of inside your staff report. And the next few tables don't follow the same theme as in your staff report, so if you watch the screen, it'll be moving through those tables in a different order, but we think appropriate for today's presentation. So when you take that map and you take that conservation strategy and you start to convert it to acres on the ground, what you see emerge over the next 50 years is roughly 48,000 acres of land will go into conservation. Inside that purple area, inside that reserve area. It's not all the reserve area, it's a portion of the reserve area, split between the valley floor and the foothills. Of that 48,000, roughly 13,000 acres will have our touch on it as we restore those lands. So that's that vernal pool restoration for the most part. Oak woodlands, riparian, valley oak, and a lot of wetlands. When you look at the individual community types, you start to see the breakdown. The largest single area of conservation on the landscape is the vernal pool grasslands. That's the 17,000 acres. In addition to that, part of that grassland mosaic is 7,000 acres of grasslands that might be dry, but again, it's part of trying to recreate that savanna-like condition on the valley floor. There are wetlands and riparian areas out there. When you move to the foothills, it's roughly 10,000 acres of oak woodland going into conservation. Back down on the valley is one of the areas that we're still talking about a lot, which is rice. There's roughly 15,000 acres of rice in Placer County today. It may not be 15,000 acres of rice tomorrow. That'll be the choice of the individual landowner. So for purposes of the conservation strategy, rice brings benefit from a habitat perspective to our community. If rice goes to other crop types, it could be a diminishment of value. It may not be a species issue for us, but it may be an overall diminishment of values. We are spending some time, a lot of time, thinking about rice. Then when you look at what we do with that landscape, so the 13,000 acres that we're going to restore, you can see by far that the vernal pool complexes, 9,000 acres of restoration, is at the top of the list. Also at the top of the list from a cost perspective is the 1,000 acres of oak woodland. So the 1,000 acres of oak woodland, as you'll see in slides that will come, is actually a fairly expensive endeavor. And I won't run through all the other materials, but you can see that there's, to a much lesser extent than the vernal pool complexes, there's a fairly significant amount of restoration that will occur. The next series of slides, Sally Nielsen from Houserath Economics Group, she will run you through the costs. So for each one of those slides that I presented, Sally will be able to walk you through the individual costs. And then Sally will turn it over to Bob Spencer, to my left from Urban Economics, and Bob will walk you through what's coming on the funding plan, which will be later on this summer.
Thank you, Lauren.
Good morning.
Morning.
In your staff report and in the slides, I'm going to be presenting mostly some relatively large numbers, and I wanted to first set a little bit of context for those to understand. We call them preliminary cost assumptions. Another word for them is basically the budget, the implementation budget for the 50-year PCCP to acquire and manage and restore upwards of 48,000 acres of land in the West Placer Reserve area. These are not necessarily costs that would be borne by Placer County, the City of Lincoln, any of the other participating entities, or even land developers or federal and state government, but the costs will be spread as we do our funding plan over all those parties. I'm going to be presenting big numbers. I'm going to start with some little numbers to show you that we have developed basically from the ground up a very detailed cost model. This gives a little screenshot of some of the kinds of detail that we use. It's detailed and comprehensive so that we can be sensitive to the different aspects of the conservation strategy. We can see how much certain components of restoration cost, how much certain components of management cost, and if, as we change the strategy over time, see what the implications are for the budget. We also, by drilling down into staffing and fencing and all those kinds of cost components, we can see that our costs are reasonable, and that we've covered all possible aspects of the kinds of activities that the implementing entity would be undertaking. The biggest component of the cost is land acquisition. This is acquisition of fee title interests or conservation easements on, again, 48,000 acres of land over a 50-year permit term. The total comes to about $630 million of actual acquisition from willing sellers, plus an additional $30 million for site improvements, fencing, security, signage, gates, and things that need to be done to secure properties. Embedded in the big $630 million number are assumptions about the kinds of land that would be acquired. Is it rice land? Is it vernal pool grasslands? Is it oak woodlands? The locations, the parcel sizes, those are the kinds of factors that we use to build up the big number here. We got input from appraisers who have done a report on the current land value, current real estate market for open space and agricultural land in western Placer County. We've also embedded in these estimates the actual experience of, which has been considerable over the last 10 years or so, of Placer County and the Placer Land Trust in these kinds of land transactions. And so those numbers are embedded in our per acre cost factors. You'll notice in the slide it shows higher average assumptions for the valley versus the foothills. The main driving factor there is the fact that more of the acquisition in fact, a considerable portion of the acquisition in the valley is of vernal pool grassland complexes, and those types of lands do command a premium in the land market. These factors now are undergoing review. These are, I think, conservative planning level estimates. They're undergoing review now as we refine the plan, and then want to also emphasize that as the PCCP is implemented, there will be annual review of these numbers and then a more full-blown review every 5 years to see actually as the PCA is out there acquiring land, what are the actual values in the market that they confront. So again, the $660-some million, about 60% of the overall budget. Next, we have restoration. This is Table 8 in the staff report. Restoration, as Lauren mentioned, is a significant component of the PCCP. The total budget is about $168 million over the 50-year term. It's 20% of total costs. Oak woodland restoration, as Lauren mentioned, is a significant component of this. It's a costly component. Again, we are reviewing these cost factors along with all of the other restoration cost factors with people out in the field who are doing this kind of work, and we'll be refining these over the next couple of months. And I would mention that these restoration factors that you're looking at include not only the hard construction activity of doing the restoration, but there's a lot of additional cost that goes into doing restoration for habitat and species. We have plans and specs, elaborate engineering. There is also a significant component of monitoring costs during construction because you're working in sensitive habitat areas. You need to be concerned about species while you're doing that. And then also after the restoration project occurs, a component of cost to monitor and maintain the site and to make sure that it is successful over time. And a lot of these requirements actually come along with the interests of the federal agencies who will ultimately be signing off on the permit. So overall, we have a total of $880 million over the 50-year term for our capital or one-time costs related to implementing the PCCP, mostly in the land acquisition and restoration categories that I've just talked about. There are other one-time costs that we put in our different cost category line items for reserve management. We have some capital costs for providing water supply for grazing, field facilities, upgrading of fencing, and those kinds of some equipment to manage the reserves. And the balance of the planned costs is ongoing annual operating costs. The total over the 50 years is about $214 million. That works out to about $4.2 million per year for an annual budget to manage the land, monitor the species and the habitats, and do reporting to the wildlife agencies, and then also do environmental compliance work for your restoration and management projects, as well as the program administration that goes on with managing the flows of income and expense, as well as the reporting to the agencies. There is a staffing plan behind these ongoing operating costs. We have ranging throughout over the 50-year term, depending on the amount of land being managed and the level of activity related to acquisition and restoration, which occurs early in the program, around 8 to 14 FTE for reserve management. We have scientists, we have biologists, we have acquisition specialists. It's all sort of detailed out there. We have 4 or 5 FTE for program administration, budgeting, IT specialists, and administrative functions. Just to give a little bit of a comparison about how this $4 million annual budget compares to other land management activities, similar types of land management activities. For example, Placer County Parks and Grounds Maintenance. Their most recent annual budget number, about $3.4 million per year to do the kinds of, not exactly this type of management activity, but of a large land base. Placer Land Trust has an annual budget of about $700,000 a year to manage about 7,000 acres of land. The bottom line, Table 12 from the staff report, we have a program, our current planning level program estimates of a little over $1 billion for the 50-year permit term. That includes all of the capital costs as well as the cumulative annual operating costs over those 50 years. 60% is acquisition, 20% restoration, 10% for management, monitoring, and environmental compliance, 5% in program administration, and 5% contingency built into our estimates now. And understanding that these are the budgets that we'll be going in, using to develop the funding plan as the PCA is actually working and implementing the plan. The costs will be refined, and the 50-year estimates will be refined and updated to reflect the actual experience of the entity.
Supervisor Montgomery has a question.
Okay.
And I just want to get a little bit of clarity on this $1 billion over 50-year number. Where does that money come from?
The money comes from a combination of the entities, the development community, the public entities that will be having impacts will pay a share of the cost as a part of a mitigation component. And then there's another component that is what we call the conservation component that comes from other sources, primarily state and federal sources, and there's some smaller components of that. And Bob will discuss that in more detail in about 2 slides. Okay.
I think the point she's trying to make is that none of the money comes out of the general fund, correct?
True. Yes. As I mentioned up front, this is not meant to be presented as a Placer County cost, general fund cost.
Thank you.
And finally, this last slide represents the post-permit costs. There are some additional management and monitoring and administrative costs that need to occur beyond the 50-year permit term. Acquisition is complete, restoration is complete, but there will be a scaled-down skeleton staff doing some more reporting, as well as managing the land that the PCA actually owns, and then monitoring the easements that it owns. We estimate those costs to be about $2.7 million a year, substantially less than the 4.2. And those costs continue at some level in perpetuity, and the funding of those costs is part of the funding plan. Also, those do not become part of an obligation of the county. So now I will turn it over to Bob to discuss some of that funding plan.
Thank you.
Sally?
Oh, yes.
A couple of questions. One is, of our land acquisition cost, what % are we assuming currently for outright acquisition versus the opportunity to acquire just an easement?
It's about, on average, it works out 80% fee title, 20% easement. Again, as Lauren showed, we have a strategy that's pretty detailed by land cover type. So we have different assumptions for rice land and ag land. Since there's a lot of restoration going on, a lot of initial acquisition needs to be fee title because of the restoration activity. Conceivably, that land could be, the restoration could happen, the land could be turned over again with a conservation easement on it. But our assumptions going in are, we think, need to be relatively conservative, because it costs more, obviously, to do the fee title acquisition, but it works out 80-20 overall.
Right. And so the net dollars, if you will, we may, for example, be involved in a project where property is acquired, let's say it's then restored into vernal pool, and then that potentially is sellable except for the conservation easement regarding the permit requirements to cow and calf operation, for example.
Yes.
So we included those kinds of assumptions through the process.
We haven't built in the secondary transaction part,
Okay.
but to the extent that the entity was able to do that and then recoup some of the funding, that would definitely be those are the kinds of details of implementation that you can't really get into forecasting at this point, but they would certainly be ways in which the PCA at all times, its intent would be to sort of minimize its ongoing obligations, or except to the extent that it needs to assure the wildlife agencies that the terms of the permit are being met, to the extent that it could release itself from some of the ongoing fee title obligations of ownership, it would want to do that, I would think.
Thanks. And then related to that, of course, there are quite a few nonprofits, mostly in the industry, who will take ownership and the responsibility for the conservation easement, and thereby the permitting requirements that include the management of the habitat and the reporting about the health of the habitat, all of the details involved in the permit itself. So they're in that business, and oftentimes they will get, as the offset to taking responsibility for that easement, of course, the funds that reflect accommodating those costs. So it sounded like we will have, though, responsibilities related to staff to make sure that all of that compliance does in fact occur. So is our staff more focused on the oversight of making sure that the nonprofits do in fact comply with those costs, or do your numbers assume that we will be actually on the front lines of implementing the responsibilities for reporting and management, et cetera?
Right now, these costs assume more of the latter. But to the extent that there are partnerships that help the PCA reduce its costs, then those could certainly be part of the program as it evolves. And I think those partnerships are exactly how things do happen. For example, in East Contra Costa County, a significant partnership there with East Bay Regional Park District for land management, that it was not costed out as part of their planning effort, but is the way it is actually working on the ground, and those kinds of things could certainly happen in Placer.
So thanks. And then with that, it sounds like in conversations we've had also on the ad hoc committees, so I apologize for the redundancy, but also for the public, it sounds to me like as we go forward and continue that our costs are extremely conservative, but it's much more likely that our costs will be less than this, particularly with some of the efficiencies, the economies of scale, and the management opportunities that we will have with this unique project, as would be otherwise.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more?
I see no more questions, so thank you, Sally.
No, I just wanted to comment. I wanted to tee off on what Robert was saying. I'm not necessarily worried about the number. The number is what it is. What I'm more concerned about is whether or not the agencies we got to deal with them that it's going to be a deal, and it's not going to shift every other year as to an amendment to what they want done. That's the biggest concern I've got. It sounds to me like the folks are willing to pay for the certainty, but the question is do we actually have certainty?
Thank you.
Good morning. Robert Spencer, Urban Economics, part of the consulting team, working with Lauren and your staff to put together, my job is the funding plan side of this. So just a couple slides, and it's really, I'm just giving you the 50,000-foot view today. The funding plan assumptions, to reiterate what Sally said in response to the question already, there's absolutely no intention that any of this funding would come out of the general funds of any of the partners, any of the permittees, as they're called, City of Lincoln, County of Placer, PCWA. These would be funded by a combination of sources. I guess I should amend my comment about PCWA. They're a rate-based agency, they're an enterprise agency, so it's a little bit different how their funding would flow into this. But certainly for the city and the county, no general funds are anticipated. Instead, you pay to play. You pay to participate. You pay to get that certainty. Well, who benefits from the certainty? It's primarily those that are what are called covered activities, activities covered by the permit. Primary activity is private development. Private development, getting that certainty, will be paying for a large, in fact, the majority of the funding is anticipated to come from private development related to their mitigation impacts under the plan. There's a mitigation impact, there's a conservation benefit in addition. The mitigation impact is that direct, if I hurt or disturb land, that has a habitat value, what do I need to do to mitigate that? That share of the plan would come from private development and other covered activities, meaning public works projects, as Lauren described, in-stream construction by the PCWA, road projects like Placer Parkway. So those public projects as well would be seeking mitigation, so they would pay a share. And then the conservation side, which is the often called contribution to recovery of species, which is the over and above mitigation. There's also benefit that development receives on the conservation side because they get certainty under the State Endangered Species Act. So there is a benefit there, but I guess at a 50,000-foot level, we're going to we're going to parse it out so that mitigation is paid by those that are seeking coverage under the plan, conservation is paid by state and federal agencies. And the state and federal agencies are very familiar with this conversation. They've been through it in East Contra Costa, they've been through it in Santa Clara. They are anticipating that they will be not technically on the hook because they can't budget more than a year in advance, but they understand that it's their responsibility to seek, to assist in, to come up with funding for a large share of the plan. So you have the mitigation side, recovered activities, conservation side funded by state and federal at a 50,000-foot level. Ongoing funding will come from this funding, what's called in perpetuity. Sometimes it's called an endowment because you have to assure the state and federal agencies that you will have funding beyond the 50-year permit term to keep up with the monitoring and management. That could come from a variety of sources. It could come from a combination of the two pots I just cited. It could come from other ongoing sources that we identify in the course of putting together the funding plan. So how does that then break out? Just coming down one level of detail. So the state and federal piece will be will detail out the primary sources, what often are called the Section 6 grants under the State Federal Endangered Species Act is a major funding source for these plans. There are a series of state water bonds that have been used. The most recent one, Prop 84, has been a tremendous source of funding in East Contra Costa. The plan will anticipate that there will be future water bonds over time and that the state will be able to participate for their share of this conservation side of the plan. On the mitigation side, you can think of it in two general pots. One is an area-wide pot. Everybody, all private development and the public works projects that are disturbing land will all pay a mitigation fee, one or another type of mitigation fees. In addition, if you happen to touch special habitat, if the land that you're disturbing is aquatic, is a wetland, is a vernal pool, you will pay over and above, you will pay an additional special habitat restoration fee. The idea is to, of course, provide an incentive to not touch special habitats. Of course, the idea is to ensure that those that have that over and above cost impact pay an over and above mitigation fee. So that's the way the mitigation side of the funding will break out. Area-wide piece and then a special habitat piece. Finally, we have a finance committee that we've just struck, met for the first time a couple weeks ago, last week actually. We're looking forward to having Sally run all the cost assumptions by the committee. We'll be seeking consensus from the committee that the cost model inputs are reasonable. And the committee is broad-based. It's got real estate representatives. It's got nonprofit representatives. It's got folks from the appraisal community. So we think we've got a really good diverse group to truth our inputs. And then they'll also be commenting on the funding plan. So as we come forward with the mitigation fee schedules and the fair share analysis, we'll be seeking their comments on that as well. We'll had our first meeting May 30th. We'll be having a meeting next week, June 13th, to start drilling down into the cost model. So I'm prepared to take any questions at this point or turn it back to Lauren.
Any questions from board members? Seeing none, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Clark.
The final couple slides will focus on the potential for the change to the eastern boundary of the conservation plan. What you see to my left is a figure that shows where the plan was back in the early 2000s. That would be the blue line. That was the boundary of the PCCP at the time we released the notice of preparation and notice of intent to prepare an EIS under NEPA. So that's one place that we could go, literally, is go back to that old line. The current boundary is the dark black line, and the boundary that we were looking at is some combination of the old line and the new line. The reason for doing all of this is what we are looking at is sewer maintenance district number 1 and the potential for SMD1 to be expanded in the future as the North Auburn area builds out. And what you see is the dark orange is the current boundaries of SMD1, so a lot of non-contiguous properties. And then filling in that gap over time would result in what you see as the cross-hatched area. It may bounce around a little bit different. This is a prediction of where SMD1 would be. This is not an adopted line today. But as you can see, it does move us east from the current PCCP boundary. And what we wanted to bring to the board today was a couple of options. The reason why we're doing this is as part of the dialogue that we've had with the Fish and Wildlife Service on their consultations on the environmental document and the environmental permitting. There are endangered species issues in the foothills. California red-legged frog is one. This figure represents some data that was derived around that species, Valley elderberry longhorn beetle, as well as concerns about aquatic resources, including salmon and steelhead, that are in the Coon Creek, Dry Creek watershed. Not quite up to the Auburn area because of waterfalls, including waterfalls on Hidden Falls, but nevertheless part of that same drainage. So to sort of reconcile those issues, to provide an opportunity so that the regulatory issues for SMD1 are covered at one time, we wanted to bring forward a boundary that represents where build-out would be, thus the combination of options that we have. So on the left on this figure is where we're at today. On the right is where we could go. We could also go, which is the old boundary. We could also go just strictly to the boundaries of SMD1, which would be this cross-hatched area, and not necessarily pick up the balance of the Coon Creek watershed, which would be this area here and this area here. So there's not a sort of a hard and fast decision today. That isn't something that can be modified and adjusted in the future. Again, to the extent possible, when we have a good static map, we can derive a lot of these numbers and we can do a lot of things. So we obviously don't want to change this substantially again, but for planning purposes, we do feel that it's appropriate for the board to weigh in on this. We have brought it to the ad hoc committee in the past. Obviously, it's been of great interest to District 5 supervisors in the past, which is why we brought it here today. So again, we could go with what you see on the map, or we could go with some combination, and staff is prepared to accommodate the board's interest there. And then lastly, in closing, want to bring you back to how we expect that governance will occur. The county and the city of Lincoln, as well as PCWA and Sparta to a lesser extent, will do what they've always done. They'll regulate land use and conduct sort of their carrying out good government as we provide facilities and services to those future constituents. So we will simply be picking up an additional burden of regulating on behalf of the Wildlife Agency's Corps of Engineers, et cetera, but we do so in a very traditional manner, something we're very familiar with from a process standpoint. We bring their regulations into our process. The Placer Conservation Authority is not a regulatory body. They are the body that carries out the activities of the PCCP based upon the mitigation that is derived from the county and the city. So the dollars essentially flow out of this land development process to the PCA, which is a joint powers authority. They then buy land, restore land, monitor land, report, et cetera, all those things that Sally detailed. The wildlife agencies don't have a regulatory role directly. Clearly, the regulations are embedded with them, will always stay with them, but their job is to monitor us, their job is to ensure that we carry the PCCP out over time. To make all that happen, what we see is a transition of the work of the ad hoc committee to sort of these nuts and bolts mechanics, probably this fall, that we will spend less time on the conservation strategy because that work has hopefully largely been done, and now start to focus on those mechanical elements of the plan itself. Governance, funding, finance. There's a whole host of ordinances and procedures that we're going to want to put together. In terms of the staff and the consultants, our focus is largely on getting the second administrative draft done, getting that approved, moving towards a public review draft. The other critical element, and it receives a fair amount of background in your report, is the work that we're doing with the Corps of Engineers and EPA on the 404 permitting. When we hear from the property owners, what they want is certainty, and pretty much at the top of the list from what we hear in terms of certainty is the ability for the county and the city to show efficiencies on the 404 process, that it's fast, that it's efficient, and that it's certain. So the plan might have some premium costs. but those premium costs might be set off by those guarantees that come with 404. So that's getting a lot of attention right now by staff and consultants. Where we go from here is in August. We hope to be back to the board with more detail on the funding plan, more detail on some of the costs, particularly related to the foothills that we're looking at very closely. And we also hope to be able to give you an update on the 404 permitting, and in particular the use of an MOU for the efficiencies that we hope to seek. So in closing, we have one action, which is to approve an adjustment to the eastern boundary, the PCCP regulatory coverage area, in order to incorporate the current and anticipated future boundary of Sewer Maintenance District 1, and we would turn that back to the board as to where that boundary might be, and we're certainly here to offer any advice and support that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Montgomery.
Yeah, Lauren, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. I would just really weigh in terms of this eastern boundary adjustment. I think it would frankly be premature for this board to take that action today for a number of reasons. One, I certainly don't feel like I've had enough education and background on this to make a valid decision today. But more importantly, I think you probably remember all too well some of the contentious public meetings that related to that boundary. And we as the county made some very strong public outreach and notification to the property owners, both back under Supervisor Krantz, and then when we brought some of the 5th District back into this. We have not done this in this case, and I'm very concerned about putting people back into a boundary that many of them were very concerned about being in the first place without adequate notification. So I would suggest that we not take any action approving the adjustment, but maybe you and I and some other folks sit down, get a better understanding of really specifically what's being proposed and how, if indeed that is something we move forward with, how we notify the property owners in the area as to what the implications would and would not be, more importantly, for those folks.
Easy to accomplish.
Supervisor Duran.
Yeah, Lauren, are we under any time constraints at all for taking this action on this realignment?
The environmental permitting for the sewer maintenance district project is an activity conducted by the City of Lincoln and their consultants. We've been present at virtually all of those meetings and will continue to do so because of our investment in that project. We do have a September deadline. I can't remember the exact date, but it is September that all environmental clearances have to be achieved. Amongst those is what we hope to be an informal consultation from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on impacts associated with the project. What they have put forward is their concerns about growth inducement, even though we are providing the appropriate assurances that this pipeline to Lincoln is accommodating existing growth. This action sort of delivers on that. So as long as we can move forward between now and September and provide that assurance, I think that is the deadline that we would be looking at.
And Supervisor, is that your intention to get this thing done before September?
Absolutely. I think we need to revisit it, certainly. But at this point, the implications both to SMD1 and the PCCP are certainly not clear enough to me from today's presentation to really move forward with giving specific direction today.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're moving forward, no more funny business. All right.
Supervisor Liggett.
And another item that strikes me, Lauren, as a result of the meeting we had with Fish and Wildlife Service regarding regional is, I don't know the status of this with staff, but I saw deal points, I guess, offered by Auburn as it relates to the oversizing concept. Both potentially connect to the indirect impacts issue, growth inducement issue. So if colleagues are supportive in hearing your comments, Jennifer, I think both of those questions, the notice on the boundary change as well as the potential impact that Auburn's deal points might have on both the indirect impacts and how the service is going to be reacting to that, should be something that staff should package and somehow point us, the 5 of us, in the right direction so that we can resolve those questions as board policy with more than adequate time for the September meeting.
Yep. Okay. Any more comments from board members? Anyone in the audience wish to address the board on this item? Seeing none, thank you so much for a very comprehensive, detailed analysis. and we look forward to seeing you soon. We'll now move to our 10:30 timed item, Community Development Resource Agency, single-room occupancy, residential housing, housing element implementation. Michael Johnson.
Good morning. Michael Johnson with the Community Development Resource Agency. As the staff continues to implement the county's housing element, staff brings forward a proposed zoning text amendment for single-room occupancy residential housing. This morning's presentation will be made by Kathy Donovan.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Donovan, Planning Services Division. Bringing forward the Community Development Single-Room Occupancy Housing Zoning Text Amendment. The proposed zoning text amendment results from State Housing Law, Senate Bill 2. It's part of the county's G4 housing element. And Senate Bill 2 requires that SRO buildings be allowed by right in at least one zoning district. Excuse me. In the county's 2009 housing element, it was proposed that a zoning text amendment would take place that would allow SRO units to be in one of the zoning districts by clearance in either multifamily residential, highway service, or resort zoning districts. This is the proposed definition for the zoning text amendment for single-room occupancy units. And these are the permitted zone districts that we are recommending for the SRO units, with the clearance in highway services and resort for 30 or fewer units, and by use permit for greater than 30 units in those districts, and then commercial, neighborhood commercial, general commercial, and commercial plan development, as well as residential multifamily. The map here, it's a little hard to see, but it's to show in the county where the highway services are located and the resort zoning. Most of the highway services are along Interstate 80. Resorts are typically around bodies of water where there's camping opportunities. Maps. The development standards for the units are for 150 to 400 square feet per unit, maximum of 2 persons, laundry facilities, and SROs, as opposed to hotel units, are for stays longer than 30 days, where hotels are 30 days or less transient. SROs are designed for 30 days or longer housing. An existing structure may be converted to an SRO facility, and this is what we think would most likely occur if someone wants to develop, is to convert a former hotel motel, or possibly new construction in the Tahoe area for employee workforce housing. So in the development standards, the units themselves contain a partial or full kitchen. Most of the ones that I've seen in California look very much like a hotel room. Some of the newer micro apartments, as they're called in the bigger cities in the downtown, look a lot more like a cruise cabin. Lots of built-ins, lots of little places for to store and things like that. There are quite a few in Sacramento, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area. Some examples of the floor plans would be, most are the rectangular shape, where there's one bedroom, a bathroom, and usually a kitchenette. You can have 2 separate units that share a bath. And then just another example of a floor plan. The staff is recommending that, what are we recommending? To adopt the negative declaration, adopt the ordinance for the county zoning for the single-room occupancy, and to adopt the change to the building code that would allow alignment with the definition with the SRO units. The item was taken before 12 Max. It was originally taken with an idea of clearance in the multifamily residential, highway services, and resort. But after going to the first Planning Commission meeting in September, Planning Commission, in comments from the MAC and the public, had concerns about high-density development in residential. So the Planning Commission directed staff to go back and take a look at the zoning districts. We did do that. Looking at where hotels, motels are currently allowed, we made the changes to the commercial districts and in the residential multifamily by use permit. Are there any questions?
All right. Supervisor Montgomery.
Yeah, Kathy, could you go back to, I think it's slide number 5, which is the slide that shows the permitted zone districts?
Mm-hmm.
There we are. So I thought what I understood you to say is that the residential multifamily was not included in just the something that does not require a permit, but I see just a C up there.
The C is for resort and highway services.
Okay, there's also a C if you look under residential multifamily. Oh, I see, that's just 20, I'm sorry, SRO is just the blue.
The blue lines.
Sections,
Right.
okay. And what is the difference between a blue C and a red C? So there's a red C under resort?
I see it.
Is that
I
just
don't know what the difference.
Okay, just some sort of typo? Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure there wasn't any particular meaning for that. Thank you.
No.
So what you're proposing here then specifically for SRO, I'm not going to worry about the multifamily unit piece. What you're proposing for SRO is that the resort and the highway service be the two zoning areas for which there is not a permit that's required. These other zoning uses would require a permit and a public process.
Well, even in the clearance, it would require building permit, but right, sorry.
I mean like a conditional use permit or a
Correct.
minor use permit.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry. And one of the things that I think is important to note on this is that, because this has been raised as an issue, is, SB2 requires that at least one zone district be identified to permit SRO units without a use permit or other discretionary action. It does not require that we only use one.
It does, no, it doesn't require that we only use one. And looking at the maps and where these zones and the limited amount of developable land in those zones, we felt that if we were to actually have the SROs and to make them work and to follow what the intent of the law is, that we would need at least those two areas to have a good representation countywide.
All right, thank you.
Supervisor Whitehead? Any other comments from board members? I will open this up to the public. Please come forward. Good morning, Muriel.
I'm Muriel Davis from Penryn, and I sent you an email, but I have a few things I'd like you to consider before you make a decision today. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. One, this proposal is completely different than what was presented at the July 24th Penryn MAC meeting and at the other MACs. The original proposal had just the highway RS, the HS, the RES, and the REM, and the people that were at the MAC meeting were very much concerned about including the REM because it didn't make sense. The scope has since increased with a greater impact to the residents since those presentations, and I feel that doesn't seem right. These SROs are not like apartments or hotels because they don't have to have a bathroom and don't have to have a kitchen. And to expand the zoning districts beyond the one district required by the state makes no sense. Also, why allow SROs in the neighborhoods zones like RM and the commercial C1 when hotels and motels are not allowed? That seems like a discrepancy there. Why allow SROs to be more easily allowed in the neighborhood commercials like RM and C1 districts without a planning commission approval when those districts would have a major impact on the local residents? because you're in the neighborhoods. So I'm requesting that you please remove the RM, C1, and C2 districts from this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you address her concern, someone address her concern about why?
As the board is aware, staff takes all presentations for zoning text amendments to the max for their review. There was an early recommendation and proposal set forth by staff, and that's what was presented to the max. The project was then presented to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission provided additional direction as to what the commission felt was appropriate for additional zones to be included. The zoning text amendment was modified to address the changes recommended by the Planning Commission, and that's the proposal that's before you today. So in staff's mind, the process has worked. While the max may not have seen this exact proposal, they were made aware of this item coming forward in the Planning Commission as its prerogative, made modifications, and sent that forward for your consideration.
Supervisor Durand.
Yeah, Michael, was that at the meeting you're talking about, the December 20th, 2012 meeting?
That's correct.
Okay, and I want to just comment at this last sentence here. It says, "No members of the public spoke at this hearing." Is that correct?
I would have to defer to the record here.
Okay, thank you very much.
So if, addressing Ms. Davis' concern, if someone in the Penryn area had a residence and they wanted to apply for a SRO, would they have to go to the building department and get an approval? And
Depending upon the zoning district, if they were within the highway service or the resort zoning district, it would not require discretionary approval, would just require a building permit. If it was within the residential multifamily, the C1 or the C2, it would require a minor use permit, which is considered by our zoning administrator.
And so there would be a public outreach for that?
That's correct.
Okay.
So
if her neighbor wanted to do this, she would be notified that?
That's correct. And as directed by your board, all discretionary approvals are presented to the local max before they are presented to the hearing bodies.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any other public comment? One final.
It's my understanding that a minor use permit does not require a planning commission hearing.
But it'd be.
That is correct. The zoning administrator considers minor use permits.
But would that go to what?
The C2s, the commercial ones, require a planning commission hearing, and that doesn't make sense why they would require it in one and when it really should be in the planning commission, because more people are notified about planning commission hearings than just the MAC.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? What is it? Oh. Mr. Whitaker?
Good morning. My name is Herb Whitaker, and I'm the managing attorney of the Local Office of Legal Services of Northern California, which is the local nonprofit providing free legal assistance to low-income clients in Placer County in civil cases. I'm also a resident of Placer County, living in the unincorporated area. I would like to address the ordinance and express my support for the ordinance and urge the board to adopt the ordinance. Before I do that, though, let me just briefly comment that I was watching the board on its video stream before I came rushing down here today to attend this hearing, and I'm pleased to report that the video worked perfectly, the technology worked perfectly, and that you board members all looked terrific. So I was very, I'm always very pleased when technology works. So I just wanted to report that to you. Getting back to the matter at hand, I do want to support the adoption of this ordinance primarily because through my experience at the Legal Services Corporation, I've learned that there is such a serious need for affordable housing in Placer County. Just a couple of things that you might find interesting. There was an article from the San Francisco Chronicle dated May 27th of 2013, which reports from the Brookings Institution that for the first time their studies indicate that poverty has moved out of the urban areas and into the suburban areas. There are now more people in poverty and low income living in the suburbs than in the urban areas. And the report indicates that it's less visible in the suburban areas, primarily because of the car-centered transportation and because of single housing stock in the suburban area. And so because of that, we're not quite as conscious of the poverty. The article goes on to point out that because of those two factors, it creates a barrier for housing for low-income people, and it also creates a barrier for service providers to then service those low-income people. The article states that there's resistance from suburban communities to providing services for these residents for fear that they will attract even more poor people. There's resistance within the suburban communities to having services for the poor. That is the very reason that we need this ordinance that would allow for by right zoning in certain situations and for a reduced level of review in certain situations. One more thing very quickly. Mr. Gus Thompson from the Auburn Journal reports just last week that the homeless count was done in Placer County in this last January, and it shows that we have at least 594 homeless people in Placer County. That number is slightly down according to the homeless count, but Susie DeFawcett from the Gathering Inn reports that the number of homeless in the Auburn area is actually up, and she thinks that this count was actually down because it's difficult to get to the people in the camps. She also reports that the number, or the survey reports that the number of unsheltered homeless is up in Placer County. And that's one of the reasons that we need this ordinance for single residence rooms. Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot to mention this is a public hearing, and the public hearing is open. Anybody else wish to address the board on this item? Morning.
Good morning. My name is Mike Mapes. I'm a Placer County resident and staff attorney with Legal Services in Northern California. I work with Herb Whitaker. As Herb said, we support this ordinance to potentially provide more housing to low and very low income individuals. Statistically speaking, I believe the regional housing needs allocation expressed a need for an additional approximate 2,400 units in unincorporated areas of Placer County to serve low and very low income individuals. And I'd also like to talk about a case I'm working on right now without revealing confidences about an individual who qualifies as between low and very low income. These individuals are susceptible to losing their housing on short notice. A lot of time these individuals collect benefits such as SSI, where they're guaranteed a monthly income of about $800 to $900 a month. This individual who lost their housing because of the limited opportunities here in Placer County was forced to join the Placer County unincorporated area homeless population. You often don't think of homeless individuals as those earning $900 a month off of government benefits that they'd earned in their younger working years, but this is indeed the case. A survey of any low-income or subsidized housing developments or programs in the county will reveal long waiting lists and just general unavailability. So in support of this, I think any ordinance which would make more available these single-room occupancy units would serve the population, low and very low income of Placer County, and prevent a new homeless population on a month-to-month basis. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Supervisor Montgomery, do you have?
Yeah, I wanted to respond or amplify on Mr. Whitaker's comments about the study that came out. The thing that was most important, I think, to recognize about that study is that suburban population that they're talking about is the newly poor middle class. These are not, poor people who moved to the suburbs, but people who have, in many instances, lived in the suburbs for decades and have lost jobs, have had issues with, just being able to sustain economic viability. And I think, frankly, the intent from my perspective to allow this in the RM zoning is to really create a situation where those folks who have lived in a community for a long time can continue to choose to live in that community should someone decide to put an SRO in that community. I think largely what you will see with SROs in Placer County is they will be converted hotels and motels. It's the sort of fairly classic pattern for SROs. And I think it's also really important to point out that people who live in SROs are students, single tenants, seasonal workers like the ski resorts use, widows and widowers who need to downsize both in terms of the size of their homes and what they spend. And frankly, there's a lot of folks who are disabled who live in SROs because they have elevators. They have the amenities that, some of the other more traditional residential homes don't have. So I'm frankly perfectly comfortable moving forward in keeping all the suggested zone districts in this.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for action.
Move approval.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item 4, Community Development Resource Agency Single Room Occupancy Residential Housing Element Implementation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? The item is moved. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Now we will go to closed session.
The board will now adjourn to closed session to discuss the items listed on page 4 of the agenda. Conference with legal counsel, 2 matters of existing litigation, County of Placer versus Cardoso, and ad hoc committee versus County of Placer. Also an issue of public employee appointment, Director of Facility Services. And in addition, the board will adjourn as the Board of Supervisors and convene as the Placer County successor agency to discuss one matter of anticipated litigation.
All right.
Hopefully it'll take less time than
The board has returned, oh, sorry. I got 3 members, so.
I know. Those four.
The board has returned from closed session where they discussed the closed session items on existing litigation, County of Placer versus Anthony Cardozo and Mary Sue Cardozo. The board authorized settlement of that eminent domain action. In ad hoc committee versus County of Placer, the board gave direction to staff. The board confirmed the appointment of Mary Dietrich as the Director of Facility Services, and meeting as the Placer County Board of the Placer County Successor Agency, the board discussed one item of anticipated litigation and gave direction to staff.
That concludes your
That concludes the closed session report.
Okay.